Thank you very much, Madam, for your words of inspiration and action. I now have pleasure inviting Ms. Kate Gilmore from the UNFPA. We are very pleased that you're here all the way from the US. Madam, the floor is yours.
Today I am a man. The most wonderful Phumzile has said often of our Executive Director, Dr. Babatunde Sotomayor, that he is a brother from another mother. Well, today I'm a mister through another sister. And it is on his behalf that I celebrate the leadership of Phumzile Malembo Nkuka for the great gift of her presence on this global stage of gender justice. And it's through him that I pay tribute and must pay tribute to all those who've been involved in the organisation of this fantastic second symposium on engaging men and boys. I thank and celebrate the Men Engage Coalition. I thank and celebrate the Government of India for its hospitality. I thank and celebrate our partners, including all of UN Women, for making possible that together we have this opportunity to galvanise a tipping point for change. And UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, wants to be part of this great movement. For in partnership with the UN more broadly, UN Women and UNFPA hold common but differentiated responsibilities to ensure the United Nations is brought forward unequivocally, visibly and effectively into a struggle that is made possible not by us, but by the courage of survivors, by the conviction of human rights defenders, and by the determination of men who are willing to step out of the box that is masculinity. One important man said this: violence against women continues to be the most heinous, systematic and prevalent human rights violation. It is a threat to all women and an obstacle to all our efforts for development, peace and gender equality in all societies. It is always a violation of human rights. It is always a crime. It is always unacceptable. So said Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations. You know, investing in and thanks to powerful partnerships, particularly with civil society, including faith-based leaders, UNFPA has the great privilege of working to elucidate and to profile this solid platform across more than 80 countries around the world that men indeed are engaged for gender justice. From our work with husbands in Niger, to our work in Cambodia on engaging men in safer sex, to Uganda, where men's action groups are working to address gender-based violence, to Bangladesh, where we are researching through partners harmful masculinities, to public policy reform in Peru, to education of military recruits in Turkey and work with military personnel across Latin America, with men of faith in Djibouti and Senegal and the Caribbean and the Pacific. In other words, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. Thanks to civil society in particular, we have the privilege today of incontrovertible global evidence of the very local calls there are for women to be treated with dignity in their relationships to and with men, and the very local pleas that men be prompted to mobilise in solidarity with women and for their own dignity too. In every community, in each country, scattered across all levels of society, it's women and men who are working to uphold human rights for both women and men. to protect human rights between women and men, and to take human rights of women and men from the public into the most intimate of places, from the courtroom to the bedroom. So we must now bust out this toxic myth that for its integrity, a culture could require, even under cover of marriage or union, the rape of a child. That's not culture, that's oppression. That a rite of passage into adulthood could require the mutilation of a girl's genitalia. That's not initiation, that is degradation. That a marriage could require a segregation of sexual dignity so that it is a male prerogative alone. That is not a marriage contract. That is oppression's impost. Any practice rooted in the violation of physical or mental integrity by the more powerful against the less powerful must not be accorded the status of valued tradition, when it is in lived reality a system of intentional violation. Dear friends, the international community is poised to dry the ink on a new narrative of human progress. That current narrative, which is the Millennium Development Goals, has driven change. But its progress confirms not only that change is possible, change is doable, it is affordable, and it can have impact. However, the fruits of the development story of the past 15 years have been far from fair, far from just, and far from evenly distributed. Today, 70% of people live in countries where the gap between the rich and the poor has deepened and broadened under the course of the Millennium Development Goals. And at the same time, there are new challenges. Age and household structures are changing. Urbanisation and migration are growing. The threats of climate change worsen. Technology is reshaping how we relate, and arguably more intense polarisation is evident in both public and private discourse, centred very often on those issues which we hold most dear: sexual and reproductive health and rights, and a woman and a girl's entitlement to control their own bodies. If we are to ascend the transformative shifts that the new development agenda requires, we must waste not. We must not waste human dignity, talent or capacity or contribution, neither through bigotry nor exclusion, by neglect or by design. To the contrary, through the realisation of human rights for each of us, to the exclusion of none of us, we can surely better act in the interests of all of us. And for their talent, creativity and contribution to be fully available to the human progress project we must embrace, women and girls must be fully free. Free from preventable maternal mortality, free from gender-based violence, including child marriage and FGM, and they must be able to be in charge of their bodies, to decide when to have children, under what circumstances, and how many. You know, Einstein said you can't fix a problem with the same thinking that you used to create it. In this more interconnected yet somehow more fragmented world, if we're to keep stepping forward to a future that is sustainably different from that which so troubles us today, we must not only think out of the box, we must get out of the boxes. Masculinity and femininity are not primary states. Humanity is the primary state, the rest is just detail. Gender justice at its root is not about men and women, it is about power and powerlessness. And in the polity of the intimate as much as in the polity of the public. Our conceptualisation of the category of man must be further exploded, as we have done so significantly for the category woman. That category man is just too small. It's a tiny box with too many knockout, knockdown exits. If you're raped, you're no longer a man. If you cry, you are not a man. If you care for children, if you negotiate sex, if you're not in charge, out you go. Any identity that is walled in by the rigidities of bigotry, either about the self or the other, confines human possibility, distorts human potential, undermines human diversity for the boxed in, for the boxed out, and for the boxed about. As we claim and better centre a place for men and women, for men and boys in the struggle against gender equality and for gender justice, we must not collude in reifying those very categories we need to disturb. We must release instead gender and its intersecting identities to flow out and into the fullest contours of human potential possible. And nowhere is this clearer than in regards to young men, young boys, young girls. And it will be our investments in liberating adolescents and youth from identity's cruel, imprisoning cells, now and throughout their life course, that will define development's trajectory for the years to come. Dear friends, it's not too late, but it's most certainly overdue for the world to convert the power of condemnation of gender-based violence and the other toxic manifestations of gender inequality into effective action at scale for gender justice. For the sake of human dignity unleashed, we need a new STI, a socially transmitted infection that enlarges a deeper, more diverse and more inclusive community of insistence on human dignity. Our departure point this week is rightly with men and boys, but we journey forward in the interests of women and girls too, to an ultimate destination that is humanity for each of us, to the exclusion of none of us, in the interests of all of us, in all our diversity, our uniqueness, our commonality, underpinned by that dignity which only human rights upheld can provide. No compassion without justice, no inclusion with impunity, no engagement without accountability, no hope without human rights. So we go forward, committing to action for empowerment with BOYS, by owning your standpoint, by observing your significance, by organising your solidarity, boys. And we go forward to action for gender justice with MEN. More energy now, more engagement now, more equality now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your inspiring call for all of us to become human rights defenders in our quest for gender justice. I have great pleasure in inviting Ms. Preeti Sudan, the Additional Secretary, Ministry of Women and Child Development from the Government of India, to say a few words of encouragement for the symposium. Madam.
The distinguished guests on the dais, Ms. Wamsil Rambo Nakoa, ED, UN Women, Ms. Kate Gilmore from UNFPA, Dr. Saida Hamid, whom we all know and admire, Mr. Rahul Bose, Ms. Joni, and Mr. Osaldo of Men Engage. I'm very happy to be here on the second Men Engage Global Symposium. As I understand and as I can see, the symposium brings together researchers, practitioners, advocates, activists, government representatives like me, and donor community to share experience, evidence on how men and boys can engage creatively to contribute to gender equality. With globalization and rising aspirations, the need to engage with men and boys in our policy and schematic interventions is both urgent and imperative. Frankly, government's engagement with public or targeted groups has been largely activity-based. We got so embroiled in, if I can use the word, fetishism of activity or programmatic details that we lost a sense of the need for dialogue on core issues. When India embarked upon rural development model of community development, somehow the community part again got subsumed in the development initiatives, which were again activity-based. In recent past, there has been concerted efforts to engage women through self-help groups. The entire self-help group movement has been successful as women got together to discuss and talk about their issues and find solutions through collectivization. Most times, these issues have not been of livelihood alone, but deep personal concerns, and these groups have provided emotional support in times of need for the women. The process of collective dialogue has been aided both by civil society and also government. I'm talking about India. One of the early initiatives of institutionalization that I can recall is the government's program of DOCRA, the development of women and children in rural areas, way back in 1982-83. I'm sure Dr. Saida Hamid will back me on this. When we look at engaging men and boys, the youth clubs, the panchayats, the gram sabhas have really missed the gender component. We were shy of talking about it. The Prime Minister's emphasis recently on Chintan Sabhas, Man Ki Baat program, which is radio-based, and MyGov. These are, I think, very important and effective steps to communicate with people in an interactive manner. Our ministry has a new scheme called Saksham, which is basically for holistic development of adolescent boys. This scheme will endeavor for a dialogue with adolescent boys to make them self-reliant, gender-sensitive, and aware citizens as they grow up. So this is a small attempt to have a dialogue with men and boys in an institutionalized manner. Again, I would like to say that if you heard the Prime Minister's independent speech, which was widely circulated in international fora also, I'm aware, the Prime Minister had asked families to introspect on why there are restrictions and there is monitoring of movement of daughters and why the sons are never questioned. Parenting and schooling have an important role in instilling values of gender equality and humanity. Yesterday, if some of you watched this very popular program by Amir Khan, the Satyamev Jayate, there was a debate on masculinity. What really is the real man? The program was revealing in the sense that the stereotyping of man as a provider, protector, one who does not display emotions, or for whom violence against others is an acceptable means of demonstrating strength and control, clearly came out. Frankly, this kind of socialization, the macho man, is really a very sorry figure. He has been denied the pleasure of demonstrating emotions, showing care and concern, and being human. I'm sure this symposium will provide a forum not only to show us the way of how to engage with men and boys through international fora like this, but also to institutionalize such an engagement within policy and schematic interventions of the government. I look forward to the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Preeti Sudan. I think we are all extremely encouraged by your interest and openness to hear the recommendations from this group of eminent participants. Well, I'm sure all of you are waiting to hear the star, and I have great pleasure in inviting I have the greatest pleasure in inviting our star speaker, actor and activist Rahul Bose, and fellow traveler in the struggle for gender justice to say a few words. Rahul.
I'm reminded of what in India we have people who sometimes man elevators. So I was reminded of this 5-star hotel where I was going up to meet a director for an audition many years ago, but I was very much the same size. And he looked at me and said, "Where are you off to? Are you going to the 17th floor?" So I said, "Yes." He said, "For that director who's auditioning for actors?" I said, "Yes." So he said, After a while, he said, "Don't worry, when you grow up, you'll become a star." So, I was about 35 years old at the time. Right, so there's been a campaign that's been run by a shaving product company which urges men to protect women. And there's another video on Facebook done by very well-meaning men who, amongst other things around the ecosystem of gender injustice, talk about the castration of men who indulge in molestation and rape. And that's why I believe it's not enough for men to engage. Men have to engage in the right way. Gender equality is not about men protecting women. It's not about allowing women to do what they want to. It's not about taking decisions that are sensitive to women. It is about understanding that women will take their own decision, will exercise their own power, and will do as they wish. For that, men have to do something that is right now not in their DNA, which is to cede control. Just let it go. To understand that power is the ability to make others do what you want them to do. Whereas real relationships is about getting together and deciding what you can do together. So let me tell you something about how I grew up. This might not seem unusual to delegates from outside of India, but people from the subcontinent will understand how unusual it was. So my mother never cooked. She never entered the kitchen. Her whole life, she just detested cooking. My father loved cooking. So we grew up with a father who cooked and a mother who didn't. My mum worked. My father worked too. Every morning he would wake up and make us our lunch boxes for school. So it was the leftovers of yesterday's potatoes in those, in bread, grilled with tasty toasties or whatever it was. It was the lunch that Baba, our father, made. Every Sunday he would give us oil massages, my sister and I. And, we would spend hours, physically playing and enjoying ourselves with our dad. My mom was always a little bit, okay, just enough, now please, just go and do something else. We loved both. My mom pushed me to play rugby, and that's when my 11 years playing for India, I owe to her. My father refused to allow me to play rugby. Till the day he passed away, he would shut his eyes when he walked into the rugby ground and watch me playing. If I was playing, he was looking the other way. He wanted me to play cricket, to wear a cap so I didn't ruin my complexion, and I was a gentleman. I mean, this is all very complicated. But the point of this is that when I used to go to my friends' houses for lunch, and their mothers would be in the kitchen, I would say, "What's wrong?" They're like, "Excuse me." I'm like, "Is your father ill?" They're like, "No." I said, why is your mother in the kitchen?" They're like, "What do you want about?" I said, "No, I mean, shouldn't your father be cooking?" And that, of course, leads me to the first of 4 points out of the hundreds and hundreds of points that are going to be discussed, dimensions around the entire ecosystem of men engaging. I'd like to listen and learn more about 4 particular points. And the first one is, It is too late to tell our boys how to behave. The time has come, and it's clear and present to show them, like I was shown. If a boy sees his father walking 2 steps in front of his mother, you can be sure that's the way he will treat his wife. For that, the lens has to be turned to us, to all the adults in this country and this world, to ask yourselves, when a child comes to the parents to ask, what clothes should I wear for my cousin's wedding? Does he go to his mother or to his father? And when the boy wants to know whether he should pursue arts or commerce or science after standard 12, does he go to his mother or does he go to his father? And it's that, I believe, that issue, the nucleus of everything is right there in that home. When we say long-term solutions, well, this is it. This is it. We turn the lens towards us and ask ourselves, do we unwittingly practice gender discrimination? Do we ask our daughters to come home before our sons? Do we actually say that, okay, you can do this, but you can't do this, and we wonder later on when we think about it, we say, oh, that's because somewhere or the other I am gender stereotyped. The second issue I would love to hear more about, and I'd like to just talk about for briefly. If indeed this battle is to be won with the engagement of men, then which is that constituency of men that we can reach out to first? I've been starting to do this for the last year, and it's not easy at all. But around every battered, molested, abused, raped woman is a confused father, is an angry brother, is even an ashamed grandfather. These are men in pain, and they're adrift because the cords that bind them to orthodox notions have been cut suddenly. They're standing in the village. Can they go to work with their head held high? All kinds of complicated responses. I believe this is the prime constituency of men we should be reaching out to and spend a lot of months, if not years, with them so that they can turn around and say nobody else's wife and nobody else's daughter and nobody else's mother. So I think that chord of empathy is waiting to be touched. The third issue I'd love to listen and talk about is the fact that it's too late now for institutions who can change uniforms in a month to say, look, if society is this way, so are we. I'm sorry, we just can't take that anymore. You can, Mr. Judiciary, you can, Mr. Police Force, you can, Mr. Engineering College Institution, you can do this. That institution can and must change and doesn't have to wait for the lead from society outside. And finally, I think the entire approach to the issue of men engaging has to be multi-pronged, of course. But I'm going to take an example out of how they've been battling smoking in California. And I've been reading up a lot. I don't know, Kate, you're nodding, so you might be knowing about what started in the 80s. And they decided that although LA produces the largest number of films in the world that show smoking, nobody smokes. And so they were saying, this is a result of the last 25 years where they said, we have to engage socially, get into the schools and colleges, and magicians would come in to the middle of a school assembly and start taking black hankies out of their mouths to show the effects of smoking. And kids would just get totally, and then there would be lilies and flowers coming out of the non-smoker's mouth, etc., etc. Rap was seed in America in the early 80s. I don't know how many people can remember that because I obviously am betraying my 47 years here. But there were competitions centered around smoking. Let's do rap competitions. Graffiti was also beginning to take a firm foothold in American pop culture. So there were graffiti competitions. So there was engagements in schools, in colleges, assignments to take home for vacations, which normally used to be things like, tell us about the Egyptian civilization, was now about smoking and the effects of that. Parents and teachers compulsorily had to every year do one assignment together. And it was always centered around whether it had lung cancer or something to do with the ecosystem of smoking. And finally, the children, as part of their community projects were created. Go and do an audit of how many people have been ill in the last 6 months in your neighborhood because of smoking. And I'm thinking, this is definitely, without doubt, creatively, if we use these examples, to actually not just wait for 1 or 2 or 3, but to attack from many, many different directions in the most compassionate way. Thank you again for having me here. I'm looking forward to the next 2 days.
Friends, as you can clearly see, definitely an activist in addition to being an actor. We're very privileged to have you with us, Rahul. And now it is my honor and privilege to invite Dr. Saida Hamid,